My sister tried to steal my late husband's inheritance until a DNA test ruined her life. I'm Karen, and I'm 32. I live in Boston, and I used to be married to the kindest man I ever knew. His name was James. We'd been together for almost a decade, married for 6 of those years, and I honestly thought we had all the time in the world. We weren't perfect. He left dishes in the sink, and I snored like a truck, but we had that quiet, reliable kind of love. We were building something real. Or we were, until a red light runner on Boylston ended everything in a split second. James was on his way home from work. He was an assistant manager at a logistics company. Nothing flashy, but he was good at it, and he loved problem solving. He always said he liked the feeling of everything falling into place, which made sense. That's how he was in life, too. He made things work. It was a Tuesday. I remember because I'd just finished my shift at the cafe where I worked part-time while freelancing in graphic design. I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I picked up, it was a nurse. The kind of voice that's too calm to be anything good. By the time I got to the hospital, he was already gone. They told me it was instant. No pain. Like that's supposed to be comforting. The funeral was a blur. There were flowers, people hugging me too long, and a lot of casseroles I didn't eat. I remember standing next to his casket and feeling like I'd been dropped into someone else's life. Like I was watching a movie about some poor woman who'd lost her husband and was too numb to cry. Afterwards, I just stopped. I didn't go back to work. I barely got out of bed. I ignored my phone, ignored the bills, ignored everyone. Except my parents. That's the one thing I didn't expect. My relationship with them had never been great. My mom always made me feel like I was just getting by, while other people my age were buying houses and having kids. My dad was quieter, but no less distant. We'd talk, sure, but it always felt like small talk. They never really saw me. Not like James did. But after the funeral, they started showing up. Not just phone calls. They brought groceries, helped me clean the apartment, sat with me in silence when that was all I could handle. My mom even folded my laundry. I know that doesn't sound like much, but for her, it was monumental. At first, I thought it was temporary guilt or pity, but it didn't go away. They started inviting me over more. Sunday dinners, game nights, just being there. My dad fixed the leaky faucet in my kitchen without being asked. My mom told me stories about when she and my dad first met, stuff I'd never heard before. For the first time in years, I felt like their daughter again. I slowly started getting back on my feet, picked up more freelance gigs, got back into a routine. But the biggest change wasn't in my work or even in my grief. It was the way I finally became visible to my own family. They even started asking me for advice, which had never happened before. Financial stuff, mostly. My mom admitted they were behind on some payments, and I offered to help. Not because I had a lot of money, I didn't, but because it felt good to be useful, needed. My dad actually let me sit down with him and look at their budget. He even thanked me. I almost cried. Support groups helped too. At first, I didn't want to go. The idea of sitting in a room with strangers talking about James felt wrong, like I was giving up some private piece of him. But I went. I listened. I talked. And I realized I wasn't alone. The stories were different, but the ache was the same. It helped. I'm still not over it. I don't think you ever really get over losing someone like that. But I'm not drowning anymore. I get up in the morning. I feed the cat. I answer emails. I even started painting again, something I hadn't done since college. James would have wanted that. He was the kind of person who saw possibility in everything. He believed in me even when I didn't believe in myself. And somehow, through all this pain, I found that the people who used to barely notice me finally see me too. Losing James broke something in me, but it also opened something up. My parents and I, we're not perfect now, but there's something real there that wasn't before. Maybe it took losing him for them to finally understand me. Or maybe we all just needed a reason to stop pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Either way, I'm not invisible anymore. And for now, that's enough. Things had finally started to feel stable again. Not good, not healed, just bearable. I had my routine, my clients, my Tuesday dinners with my parents. There was a fragile rhythm to it all, like a house of cards that somehow stayed standing as long as I didn't breathe too hard. And then Syra came back. I hadn't seen her in almost 3 years. The last time we were in the same room, she was yelling at my mom about how controlling she was, about how no one in this family ever let her live her own life. She'd stormed out that night with her backpack slung over one shoulder and her phone clutched in her hand, texting someone furiously. No one heard from her after that. Not me, not our parents. Radio silence. And honestly, at the time, I didn't think she'd come back. But there she was. One random Sunday afternoon in early March, while I was helping my dad patch a hole in the kitchen ceiling, she just walked through the front door like she'd only been gone a few hours. Hair longer, curled, dark roots showing under that platinum blonde she always swore she'd keep up. Same tilted smirk that used to get her out of everything. And a baby bump. She didn't announce it. She didn't say, "Guess what?" or make a dramatic reveal like she might have when we were younger. She just stood in the doorway, rubbing her belly with one hand and letting the silence hang in the air like a dropped bomb. My mom gasped, hand over her mouth, already crying. My dad froze, paint roller dripping onto the tile. And I just stood there, trying to make sense of the fact that the same girl who used to steal my clothes and disappear for weeks was suddenly front and center again, and very, very pregnant. From that moment on, it was like I had never existed. My mom hovered over her like she was made of glass, making tea, fluffing pillows, talking in this soft, syrupy voice I hadn't heard in years. My dad went into full handyman mode, fixing up the guest room like it was a nursery to be. New curtains, fresh paint, even a damn nightlight shaped like a moon. They hadn't fussed over anyone like that since I got married, and even then, most of that had been for show. But Syra? Syra was back, and suddenly, I was 13 again, standing at the edge of the kitchen while everyone else talked over me. She didn't offer up any explanations. Not about where she'd been, not about the pregnancy. When my mom asked gently, trying to mask her curiosity as concern, Syra just smiled and said, "It's complicated," like she was letting us in on some inside joke. When I asked directly, because someone had to, she laughed and said, "You'll find out when you need to." That was it. No names, no stories, just a cryptic little grin and a wave of her hand like the whole thing was some harmless mystery. The weirdest part was how my parents just accepted it. No questions, no judgment. My mom even told me over coffee one morning, "She's been through a lot. We need to be supportive." Like I hadn't also lost someone. Like I hadn't also dragged myself out of a hole and put my life back together with duct tape and caffeine. It didn't take long before I was back to fading into the background. Syra needed rest, so I couldn't come over during the afternoons anymore. Syra was sensitive to smells, so my mom asked me not to wear perfume to the house. Syra got overwhelmed easily, so could I please not bring up anything stressful when she was around? Which, of course, meant I couldn't bring up anything at all. I stopped getting invited to dinners. My mom said they were keeping things quiet for Syra's sake, that they'd do something with me next week or the week after. My dad stopped answering my calls as often. Always busy, always tired, always with a half apology in his voice. And the one time I tried to bring it up, tried to say, "Hey, I'm still here too," my mom gave me this look like I was being selfish. "You've been so strong, Karen," she said. "Your sister's the one who needs us right now." I wanted to scream, but instead, I nodded. I said I understood. I went home and didn't call again for 2 weeks. The worst part wasn't the distance. I was used to that. The worst part was how familiar it all felt. How easily the old roles snapped back into place. Syra, the fragile one. Syra, the one who needed saving. Me, the reliable one. The one who doesn't need anything. The one who will understand, always. Except I didn't understand. Not anymore. Some nights, I'd lie awake thinking about the way Syra smiled when she brushed off questions about the baby's father. It wasn't just mystery, it was something else. Something smug, like she was enjoying the power of not telling. Like she knew we were all dancing around her, desperate for a clue, and she liked it that way. I kept trying to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe she was scared. Maybe she'd been hurt. But then I'd see the way she walked through the house like she owned it. The way my parents dropped everything to tend to her every need. And I couldn't help but feel like she was doing what she always did. Blowing in like a storm, taking up all the oxygen, and leaving the rest of us gasping. I missed James in those moments more than ever. He would have seen right through her act. He would have sat with me in the quiet, handed me a cup of tea, and said, "You're not crazy, Karen." And I'd believe him. But he's not here. And I'm alone in a family that only seems to notice me when I'm useful or when someone else isn't around to steal the spotlight. So I stopped going over. I stopped calling. I focused on my work. I put up new art in my apartment. I took long walks alone. I tried to rebuild the peace I had before Syra came back. Because maybe that's all I can do now, build something small and quiet that no one else can take away. I wasn't planning on going. When the invitation arrived, delivered in one of those overly glossy pink envelopes with little gold baby feet embossed on the front, I stared at it for a long time before even opening it. It was from Syra, of course. "You're invited to celebrate the upcoming arrival of baby Brooks," it said, as if it were some magical event and not another reminder that somehow, she was now the center of everything. Inside, there was a handwritten note. "Karen, I really hope you'll come. It would mean a lot to me. I know things have been weird between us, but I want to fix that. Let's start fresh." I didn't believe her, but against my better judgment, I went. It was held at our parents' house, which had been decked out like the set of a pastel commercial. Balloons everywhere, streamers in shades of blush and ivory, a candy bar with little jars labeled "Sweet Beginnings." Everything looked perfect, staged. Even my mom, who'd always hated clutter, had gone all in, coordinated tablecloths, a guess the baby's name, game station, a Polaroid photo booth. But the second I stepped inside, I felt it. That tight, artificial atmosphere. Like everyone was playing a part, and no one remembered the lines. Syra greeted me with that same rehearsed smile she'd worn for weeks, kissed my cheek like nothing had ever happened, and guided me to a seat near the front of the living room, close to the fireplace. "So glad you made it," she whispered, and I could feel her eyes on me long after she turned away to mingle. There were about 20 people there, mostly her friends from whatever life she'd been living the last few years. Girls with too much makeup and perfect nails who laughed too loudly and kept glancing around the room like they were waiting for someone famous to show up. My mom was floating from guest to guest like a wedding planner, and my dad stood off near the kitchen, nodding politely when someone spoke to him, clearly wishing he were anywhere else. I sat through the games, the guessing, the jokes. Someone passed around a scrapbook for people to write messages to the baby. I stared at the blank page in front of me and didn't write anything. And then, finally, it was time for presents. The gifts were mostly what you'd expect: onesies, blankets, a bassinet that cost more than my entire living room. Syra smiled and cooed and thanked everyone with fake enthusiasm, tossing tissue paper onto the floor like it was all just too much excitement to contain. And then she picked up the last box. It wasn't wrapped, just a plain white box with a silver ribbon tied loosely around it. I didn't recognize it. She held it for a moment, then looked up at me, and that's when I knew something was wrong. Her eyes locked on mine, and her smile shifted, just a little. The corners twitched, her lips tightened. And in that moment, I wanted to get up and walk out. I should have. I didn't. She opened the box slowly, lifted out a small white onesie, and held it up for everyone to see. The front was embroidered in gold thread. "My daddy's name is James." There was a ripple of confusion across the room. A few people clapped awkwardly, not understanding. My mom's hand went to her mouth. My dad blinked like he was trying to make sense of it. I just stared at the fabric, the gold letters catching the light. Syra stood up. "I know this is a little unexpected," she said, her voice sweet, rehearsed, loud enough for everyone to hear. "But I think it's time to tell the truth. The father of my baby is James." There was a long silence. Someone dropped a glass in the kitchen. I couldn't move. She turned to face me, still holding the onesie, still smiling like this was some big romantic announcement. "Karen, I didn't want to do this in front of everyone, but you've left me no choice. You've shut me out for weeks. I've tried to be patient, but this baby deserves to know who their father was. James and I," she paused for dramatic effect, "we were together. Before he died." I didn't say anything. I couldn't. The room tilted slightly. I could feel my hands clenching in my lap, my nails digging into my palms. "He was going to tell you," she continued, her voice softer now, almost gentle. "He wanted to. But then the accident happened, and, well, now I'm here. And this baby is his." I looked around the room. My mom was pale, her mouth still open. My dad had his arms crossed, jaw clenched. No one spoke. "I'm not here to cause problems," Syra said, placing the onesie carefully back into the box. "But this affects me too. And the baby. We're family. James wouldn't have wanted me and his child to be left with nothing." She turned toward me fully now, expression still soft, as if we were just two sisters having a normal conversation. "So I think it's only fair," she said, "that we talk about what James left behind. The house, the accounts, the investments. I know he didn't have a will, but we all know what he would have wanted. Half of it belongs to this child now. And to me, as their mother." That was when I stood up. I didn't say a word. I didn't look at her. I just walked out. I got into my car, shut the door, and sat there for a long time, staring at the driveway while people inside pretended they hadn't just witnessed a bomb go off. My phone buzzed once. A text from my mom. "Please come back inside. We need to talk." I didn't reply. I drove home in silence, the kind that settles into your bones. And by the time I pulled into my building's garage, I knew something had shattered, for real this time. Not just grief, not just silence, but trust. And that doesn't come back. Not after this. I barely made it halfway down the driveway before my mom came running out the front door, heels clacking against the pavement like gunshots in the quiet. "Karen, wait. Don't go," she called, breathless, like that one sentence was enough to undo everything that had just happened. I didn't stop. I didn't even turn around. I got in my car, slammed the door, and stared straight ahead. I could see her in the rearview mirror, standing there like she was the one who'd been ambushed. I should have kept driving. I should have left that house and never looked back. But I was still in shock, still clinging to the absurd hope that maybe this was some kind of sick misunderstanding. That someone, anyone, would come out after me and say Syra had made it all up. That none of it was real. Instead, the door opened again, and this time it was Syra. She wasn't crying. She wasn't flustered. She walked out like she was on stage, calm and deliberate, holding her phone high in one hand like it was evidence in a courtroom. "You all deserve the truth," she said to the guests, who were now gathered in uncomfortable clumps near the hors d'oeuvres table, murmuring to each other like a scandal had broken out on live TV. "I didn't want it to come to this," she continued, stepping back into the living room, her voice loud and clear. "But Karen's pretending like none of this ever happened. Like James and I weren't real." I stopped in the hallway. I should have kept going, but something made me turn back. I wanted to see it for myself, what lie she would twist next. Syra tapped her phone, and suddenly the television screen behind her lit up. Someone had set it up for a slideshow. She began scrolling through pictures like it was a vacation album. But these weren't just selfies or random shots. They were photos of James. Some were old. I recognized them. Pictures I'd taken, moments we'd shared. But others I had never seen before. There was one of him standing in what looked like a hotel lobby, smiling at the camera. Another where he was sitting at a cafe table, his face turned slightly away, a coffee cup in front of him. Then one of him laughing, his eyes crinkled, wearing the same coat he wore on our last trip to Vermont. "He sent me these," Syra said, her tone carefully constructed to sound vulnerable. "We used to meet when he was traveling for work. He told me he couldn't leave Karen yet, but he loved me. We were planning things. We just ran out of time." My stomach flipped. Then she opened her text messages. The screen showed a long thread of messages between her and a contact saved as J. Sweet nothings, little jokes, blurry photos. It was all there, or at least it looked like it was. The dates overlapped with times when James had told me he was at conferences. Weekends he said he was seeing his brother. Normal things. Believable things. I felt like I was drowning. Someone in the crowd whispered something. Syra turned toward my parents then, eyes wide, as if this part hurt her the most. "I know this is hard to believe, but James and I had a connection. And now his child is growing inside me. All I'm asking for is fairness. I'm not trying to take anything from Karen. Just what's right for my baby." My mom looked at her, and I saw something in her face shift. Not doubt, not fear, belief. She walked over and placed her hand gently on Syra's arm. "Of course," she said softly. "Of course we'll do what's right." My dad stepped up beside her, not saying anything, just nodding slowly like he was piecing things together and had finally come to a conclusion. "If James really is the father," he said, not even looking at me, "then the child has a claim. It's about responsibility now." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I felt like I'd just been shoved through a glass wall. "You actually believe this?" I asked, my voice thin, cracking. My mom didn't even hesitate. "The pictures, the messages, Karen, you saw them. We can't ignore it. You're taking her side?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. "Over mine." My dad stepped forward like he thought he could calm things down, but his voice had that flat, patronizing tone he always used when he was already convinced of something. "It's not about sides. It's about what's right. There's a child involved." I didn't reply. I couldn't. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely hold my keys. I turned and walked out. This time no one followed me. The drive home was a blur. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt hollow, like something inside me had been scooped out and replaced with cold static. When I got home, I sat on the couch and stared at the wall for hours. The next day, I pulled the plug on everything. I canceled the auto payments I'd been sending to my parents for the last year, the extra money I'd been slipping into their account each month to help cover the mortgage and utilities. I stopped the grocery deliveries. I shut down the side fund I'd set up to help them with their medical expenses. They'd never asked, not directly, but they'd let me help. They'd let me be the reliable one. And now, they wanted to hand everything over to the woman who'd just humiliated me in front of a room full of strangers. Let them figure it out without me. I didn't owe them anything anymore. Not my time. Not my money. Not my forgiveness. The letter came in a plain white envelope, no return address. I almost didn't open it. I figured it was junk mail, or maybe something from the hospital asking for donations again. But something about the handwriting stopped me. Tight, deliberate, like the person who wrote it wanted to be taken seriously. I sat down at the kitchen table, peeled it open, and pulled out a single sheet of thick paper folded in thirds. The first line hit me like a punch to the throat. "Dear Karen, this is a formal notification that I intend to pursue legal recognition of my child's right to inherit from the estate of James Brooks." It was signed in that same practiced cursive, Syra Brooks. There were no pleasantries, no apologies, no acknowledgement of the chaos she dropped on me like a bomb at her party. Just a cold demand. She wanted the house, the money, access to the accounts James and I had built together. She wanted it all, and she was coming for it through the courts. I don't remember getting up. I don't remember pacing the room or tearing the paper into strips and then regretting it. But I must have done all of those things because when I looked down again, the table was littered with shredded pieces of the envelope, and my hands were shaking. I called my mom. She didn't answer. I called my dad. Voicemail. I sat on the floor of my kitchen for a long time after that, knees pulled up to my chest, just trying to breathe. I kept thinking about James, about his voice in the mornings, the way he used to leave his coffee cup in the sink like I wouldn't notice, the way he'd squeeze my hand twice in the grocery store checkout line when he thought I was getting overwhelmed. And then I thought about Syra, standing in our parents' living room, smug and serene, waving those texts around like they were gospel. I felt like I was going to break. And then my phone rang. Unknown number. Boston area code. I almost didn't pick up, but something told me to answer. Hello. My voice sounded hollow. There was a pause, then a woman's voice, hesitant but steady. Is this Karen Brooks? Yes. My name is Margaret Hale. I believe I'm James' biological mother. I stood up too fast, nearly knocking the chair over. I'm sorry, what? I know this is unexpected, she said quickly. But I saw the news about the claim being made against James' estate. I've been trying to find you for weeks. I didn't know if I should reach out, but when I heard about what that woman, your sister, said at the party, I couldn't stay silent anymore. I sat down slowly. James told me his parents died when he was a child. Car accident. He said he had no one. Margaret let out a breath that was half sigh, half sob. That's not true. We never died. We were estranged, yes, but we were alive. He left when he was 19. Moved across the country, changed his number, never looked back. I don't know why he told you we were gone, but I know he loved you. I can hear it in your voice. You're the only one he ever mentioned in the letters he did send. I didn't know what to say. My mind was spinning. I have something you need to see, she continued. Something that will change everything. I'm in town. Can I come by? 15 minutes later, she was on my doorstep. She looked nothing like James. Short, pale, red hair streaked with gray, small hands that kept twitching like she wanted to reach for something. She carried a slim folder under her arm. When she stepped inside, she didn't waste time. I don't know what your sister's trying to pull, she said, laying the folder on the table, but it's a lie. She opened it and slid the contents across to me. Medical records. Dozens of pages. A full fertility workup done 7 years ago. Margaret tapped the page with a trembling finger. This one's the key. Look at the final diagnosis. It was there in black ink. Azoospermia. Complete infertility. 0 viable sperm count. Permanent. James was told when he was 25 that he'd never be able to have children, she said softly. It devastated him. He didn't talk about it, but I knew. He wouldn't even adopt. Said it wasn't the same. He told me he'd made peace with it when he met you. I sat back, my entire body buzzing with something between relief and nausea. He never could have fathered a child, she said. Certainly not with your sister. I stared at the records, the doctor's notes, the stamped signatures. It was real, undeniable. And yet, part of me still couldn't believe it. Why didn't he tell me? I asked, barely whispering. I think he was ashamed, Margaret said gently. But he never would have cheated. Not on you. That much I know. I leaned forward, my hands pressed against the table to keep them from shaking. She's threatening legal action. She wants half of everything. She won't get it, Margaret said. You'll fight her, and I'll help you. She pulled out a second document, an affidavit, signed and notarized. This says I'm James' biological mother. It also says that he was medically incapable of fathering a child. I'll testify if I have to. She's lying, and she's going to be exposed. I stared at the paper for a long time. And then, for the first time in weeks, I let myself breathe. Not because it was over, but because finally, someone believed me. Finally, I wasn't alone. I didn't sleep the night before the hearing. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between each tick of the clock. My body felt like it was wrapped in static, that low-grade hum of dread that never really goes away when you're about to put your entire life on display for strangers to pick apart. I kept thinking about how James would have handled this, how calm he was in every crisis, how he could look at any problem and break it down into steps, like fixing a leaky pipe or organizing a road trip. But James wasn't here. And this wasn't just a problem. This was war. The courthouse smelled like stale coffee and nervous sweat. Everything echoed. Footsteps, coughs, whispers. I sat in the front row behind my lawyer, hands in my lap, spine straight, even though every instinct told me to fold in on myself. Syra walked in 5 minutes before the hearing, flanked by some middle-aged attorney in a pinstripe suit who looked more irritated than invested. She wore all black, like she was attending a funeral, her hair curled into soft waves, makeup barely smudged to look like she'd been crying. She looked like a widow. The irony was disgusting. She took her seat and didn't look at me, but I could feel her glance sliding over every few minutes like she was checking to see if I would break. I didn't. The judge was an older woman, sharp-eyed and calm. the kind of presence that didn't need volume to command a room. She opened the hearing with the usual formalities. Names, statements of purpose, and then it began. Syra's lawyer started by painting a portrait of heartbreak. He called her a young woman cruelly excluded from her rightful share, described James as a man torn between two lives, and presented Syra as a grieving almost widow. His words, not mine. I could feel Margaret twitch beside me at that one. Syra dabbed at her eyes with a tissue like it was all just too much to bear. Then came the photos. The same slideshow from the baby shower, now printed and mounted. She claimed the messages were from James, that they'd been in a relationship for over a year, that she kept it secret to protect her sister's feelings. The judge nodded politely, took notes, asked no questions. Then it was our turn. My lawyer stood and didn't waste time. She went straight to the medical records, laying them flat on the table in front of the judge, highlighting the diagnosis. Azoospermia, complete infertility, permanent, irreversible. She backed it up with the name of the clinic, the attending physician, the dates. The courtroom got very quiet. Syra shifted in her seat, her mouth twitching into something between confusion and disdain. Those documents are fake, she said suddenly. They're fabricated. Karen is just trying to discredit me. The judge raised her eyebrows. Do you have evidence to support that claim, Ms. Brooks? No, Syra said, voice rising slightly. But I know James. He loved me. He would never lie about something like that. He told me I was the only one who made him feel like a real man. I looked down at my hands. Then I stood up. My husband told me he was an orphan, I said, my voice steady. He told me he had no living family. That wasn't true. This is Margaret Hale. She's his biological mother. Margaret stood beside me without waiting to be asked. She looked directly at the judge, hands folded calmly in front of her. James was my son, she said. He left home when he was 19. We were estranged for years, but I was in contact with him again before he passed. I have medical records that confirm his infertility, and I am willing to submit to a DNA test to establish that I am the child's biological grandmother. If the child is biologically related to James, it will show in the results. If not, then we'll have our answer. Syra's face went pale. Not shocked, just flat, blank, like her mask had slipped. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering something urgently, but she waved him off. The judge nodded once. Very well. Ms. Hale, thank you for your cooperation. I am ordering a DNA test to be conducted within the next 10 business days. Until then, this matter is suspended pending results. She banged the gavel lightly and stood, and just like that, it was over. For now. As people began to file out, Syra turned toward me for the first time, her expression sharp and bitter. This isn't over, she said under her breath. But I just walked past her, Margaret at my side. For the first time in weeks, I felt taller. Not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped letting her talk over my grief and rewrite my life. And whatever came next, I was ready. The results came back exactly 10 days later. A sealed envelope, hand-delivered to the courthouse, with 2 lines printed at the top of the page that made my breath catch in my throat. Probability of grandparent-grandchild relationship, 0%. I don't know what I expected when I saw the official seal, the signatures, the date stamped across the top like it was the final word on everything that had happened. Relief? Maybe. Closure? I don't know if that's a real thing anymore. All I felt was the weight finally leaving my shoulders, not lifted gently, but yanked off like someone ripping off a wet coat. The courtroom was quiet when the judge read the findings aloud. No gasps, no shouting, just stunned silence and the hollow sound of the air conditioner humming in the background. Margaret sat beside me, calm and still, one hand resting lightly on her purse. She didn't react. She didn't need to. The numbers said everything. Syra stood next to her lawyer, arms crossed tightly over her chest, her jaw clenched so hard I could see the vein pulsing in her neck. She didn't speak. Not right away. Not until the judge turned to her and asked if she had anything to say. That's when it happened. Her shoulders dropped. Her face twisted, not into sadness, but into something halfway between boredom and irritation. And then she laughed. Just once. Short and sharp. Fine, she said, brushing her hair off her shoulder like this was all just a minor inconvenience. I was seeing other people. Whatever. It wasn't serious. But then James died, and I figured, why not take a chance? The words hung in the air like poison. The judge blinked slowly. So you knowingly filed a false claim on a deceased person's estate? Syra shrugged. It was a long shot. Doesn't mean I didn't love him. I felt Margaret stiffen beside me. My fingers curled around the edge of the bench so tightly I thought the wood might splinter. The judge didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her tone cut like ice. Your claim is denied. The estate remains under the sole possession of Mrs. Karen Brooks. Any further attempt to interfere with these holdings will be treated as fraud, and you may be subject to prosecution. You are dismissed. And just like that, it was over. Syra didn't look at me as she left. Her heels clicked all the way down the aisle, echoing off the walls like gunfire. Her lawyer didn't say a word, just followed her out with his head down and his briefcase swinging at his side like a dead weight. My parents were there that day. They hadn't spoken to me since the first hearing, hadn't returned calls, hadn't even acknowledged the medical documents I'd sent to them. But they showed up, sat near the back like strangers. When the judge read the results, my mother's mouth fell open. My father turned to look at her like he didn't know who she was. Or maybe like he didn't know who he was anymore. Afterwards, they approached me in the hallway. My mom's voice was trembling. Karen, we didn't know. I cut her off before she could finish. You chose her. You believed her. And you threw me out like I was nothing. My dad tried to speak, but I stepped back. Don't. You don't get to make this better. They both just stood there, helpless, small. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't even feel vindicated. I felt done. I walked out of that courthouse and left them standing there. No goodbyes. No second chances. Just the sound of my boots on the concrete and the heavy click of the door closing behind me. That was the last time I saw either of them. Margaret and I didn't say much on the drive home. She sat in the passenger seat, watching the road, occasionally glancing out the window like she was trying to memorize the way the city looked in late afternoon light. When we reached my building, she turned to me and said, "He would have been proud of you." I nodded. I didn't trust my voice enough to speak. She squeezed my hand once before getting out, and I watched her walk away until she disappeared around the corner. When I got upstairs, I made tea. Not because I needed it, but because it was the one thing that still felt normal. I sat on the couch, held the mug between my hands, and stared at the place on the wall where James used to hang his coat. It was quiet. Not the kind that hurts. The kind that tells you the storm is finally gone. I didn't wake up one morning and decide to start over. It wasn't dramatic like that. It was slower, quieter, like a room gradually warming in the sun after a long winter. It started with dinner. Margaret invited me over a few days after the hearing. Nothing fancy, roast chicken, a bottle of wine, a little chocolate cake from the bakery down the street. She wore an apron covered in sunflowers and played old jazz records while she cooked. When I stepped inside, the air smelled like rosemary and garlic, and for the first time in what felt like years, I felt like I belonged somewhere. We didn't talk about Syra. We didn't talk about my parents. We didn't even talk about James, not at first. We talked about books, about music, about the cat she used to have named Napoleon, who used to steal socks from the laundry and hide them in the freezer. I laughed until I cried, and when I finally did cry, she didn't say anything. She just poured me more wine and let me fall apart without asking me to explain. That became our routine. Thursday dinners, sometimes Sunday brunch. She'd bring over old photos of James from before I knew him. Awkward teenage years, his first apartment, a disastrous haircut in college. And I'd tell her stories he never got the chance to share. We pieced him together, not like a memorial, but like a mosaic, imperfect, human, whole. He wasn't just mine anymore. He was ours. I went back to work too, quietly, one project at a time. I started with some old clients, logo refreshes, brand kits, nothing huge. But it felt good. My brain started working again. My hands remembered what it felt like to create without pressure. I took walks in the mornings before I opened my laptop, started drinking real coffee again instead of the sad instant stuff I'd been surviving on. I rearranged the furniture in my apartment, painted the hallway a stupid, bold shade of teal, just because I could. I stopped apologizing for how much space I took up. One night after dinner, Margaret handed me a brochure from the local library. Travel Club, it said in bright block letters. For curious souls who are tired of staying home. I almost laughed. Me in a club? But she looked at me with that gentle nudge in her eyes, the same one James used to give me whenever I hesitated too long at a crosswalk. So I went. The people were older, mostly retirees with worn passports and wrinkled maps, but they welcomed me in like I'd been part of the group forever. We talked about cities and languages, weird street food, and stolen wallets. Someone mentioned a hiking trip in the Azores. Another talked about cherry blossoms in Kyoto. And for the first time in years, I started to think about the world beyond my grief. I started to imagine myself in it. I booked my first solo trip 3 weeks later. Nothing fancy, just 10 days in Portugal, a small group tour with a few solo excursions built in. It felt terrifying and thrilling all at once. I bought a new suitcase, dug out my old camera, started brushing up on basic Portuguese phrases in the evenings. I wasn't running away. I wasn't chasing anything either. I was just going. Because I could. I haven't forgiven Syra. I don't think I ever will. I haven't spoken to my parents since the hearing, and I don't plan to. They made their choice. They watched me unravel and chose to look the other way. That's something I've stopped trying to make sense of. Some betrayals don't come with explanations. They just come. And when they do, all you can do is get out of the wreckage and walk away. But I'm not walking alone anymore. Margaret became family in a way I didn't know I needed. Not because she replaced anyone. Not because she made things easier. But because she saw me in the aftermath and didn't flinch. Because she stayed. And sometimes, staying is everything. I still wear James' wedding band on a chain around my neck. Not because I'm stuck in the past, but because he's part of me. Not just the memory of him, but the version of myself I was when he was around. The part that knew how to laugh at dumb sitcoms and believed in lazy Sundays and thought the world was full of possibilities. I'm getting back to her. Slowly, yes, but surely. So that's the story.